I am Sam Danley, Associate Editor of QSR and FSR magazines, and I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, From the Frontline, Engagement Strategies That Actually Work. So turnover is a familiar challenge. It drives up labor costs, it impacts profitability, and it's something that many accept as the cost of being in the restaurant industry. So today, we are going to hear from some experts about finding a new way to keep teams engaged and staying longer. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. First, a recording of this session will be linked at qsrmagazine.com, and you can also use today's login link for on-demand viewing. Second, slides for today's program are available for download using the resources widget on the webinar console. And finally, we will be answering audience questions at the end of the program, but please feel free to submit a question in the Q&A box at any time. And now to begin, there are two guests joining us today. We have James Appleton, the Director of Talent Acquisition Products at Harri, where he leads the strategy and development in improving the company's talent acquisition product. And he brings a wealth of knowledge to the table with over 10 years of experience in HR and hospitality operations. We also have Elliot West, a dedicated senior people operations manager at Savory Restaurant Fund, where he specializes in the art of placing the right talent into the high growth engine that is the Savory Fund. And with that, I will turn it over to them to get started. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you very much, Sam, and welcome everyone to this webinar. So I'm James, and I'd just like to jump straight in here before I get into some good questions with excuse me, forgot my words, with Elliot from Savory to really hear about his insight and his experience. So as we all know, the engagement is costing a huge amount to our industry and to the economy at large. So if I just flip over to the slide here, you can see that when we look at the largest segment of the workforce, which is frontline workers, they're being hit especially hard by declining engagement. So nearly half of workers are leaving jobs before they reach 90 days, and turnover rate for QSR is 10x the national average of all the other industries. You can see on the chart here that you've got 150% plus in QSR, so experiencing huge pain there, whereas the average for other industries can be as low as 13%. So huge disparity in that. So what is feeding that? So turnover feeds an ongoing cycle of staffing challenges. So it's extremely painful. And you can see here that many operators are citing that they're understaffed and they're unable to meet customer demand. So that also rises their cost level. Clearly, if you've got high turnover, it's going to cost you a lot of money in a lot of different ways, whether that's hiring, whether that's training, and in particular, getting people up to a certain level of efficiency within your business. But it really impacts your profitability. So that impacts your profitability, even if you're at 13% turnover on the average. If you're at 150% in QSR, that's a huge cost to your business. So what is that ripple effect of high turnover? So we can see here on the slide that what turnover is really costing you from is lost productivity. So as I said, getting people up to that same efficiency level. If you've got someone who's left your business and trying to bring someone new and train them and get them up to this same efficiency level, if you've had someone that's been there for 6 months or a year previously, you're trying to reach that same level of efficiency, that takes a long time and it's very costly to get there. You might need to be employing more people on a given shift in order to get the same level of productivity until they reach that point. Disrupted customer experiences. So we've all been there with hospitality. We've all been there as a guest in hospitality where the experience hasn't been fantastic. And that's through not the fault of the employee, but they're new, they're learning. So that really does take time. And then increased operating costs in a whole plethora of different areas. So Elliot, I'd just like to jump over to yourself. Now, at Savory, I'm sure you guys are not immune to turnover being reasonably high at particular times at certain restaurants. So how does that impact on an individual restaurant?
Absolutely, James. Thanks for passing it over. Much obliged. It's an interesting one for us as a private equity firm that is moving at a very high speed when it comes to restaurant expansion. We have to work very hard behind the scenes in the due diligence process to make sure that we are partnering with brands that have a phenomenal foundation. Now, there's the looming risk that with high turnover, we do all the due diligence hard work, looking at these brands, looking at the brand integrity and what the customers feel attracts them to the brand. You then have the risk that when turnover occurs, there's potential dilution of the brand because you are turning through employees. Now, to not jump the gun, we do put massive emphasis on engagement with employees to avoid that very risk, but we are very aware of the fact that the dilution of this very fragile brand can happen if there is some turnover like the rest of the industry is experiencing.
No, that makes really, really good sense. It's very insightful. How to go down to the human level, to the people level within a given restaurant, if they're experiencing high turnover, what does that mean for the management team, for example? What challenges does that present them on a day-to-day basis that you see across the Savory group?
Absolutely. I can only put my feet in the shoes of restaurant managers to think of the plates that are spinning at one time. And I think it's quite a comical visual, but the reality of it, restaurant managers have got a ton on their plate. You compare it again to other spaces, other industries, and it doesn't feel as busy what a restaurant manager has to do day to day. If you throw onto there a couple more spinning plates, we'll use that analogy, a restaurant manager then, if there's high turnover, has to worry about the recruiting process. Are my job ads up to date? Am I having flow of interviews coming in? Am I also then efficient in my training processes? And am I able to get these individuals up to speed so they can start providing value to the business? As well as I've got to go and do my inventory. I've also got to write my schedule, and I've got 2 individuals that are sick today that can't come in. And yeah, my heart breaks for those general managers. They are the salt of the earth people for sure.
And rightly, we have high focus on the brand. You know, as you've highlighted, it makes a really big impact there. Big focus on the management team. What's that impact on the individual employees? So, you know, if you're working in one of Savory's great brands, then what's that impact on me if I'm one of those employees?
Yeah, definitely. Coming from experience, I actually worked in the restaurant level before I moved into the value add team. At the time, I was able to have a really good training and onboarding process. I had one-on-one time with my general manager. At the time, the industry wasn't experiencing as high turnover rates. I was able to really buy in and felt committed to the brand I was working for because of that experience with the general manager, like I said, training and onboarding. You compare that to today with the higher turnover rates, I'm sure that out there are some restaurants that are doing training, orientation, and onboarding for 2, 3, 4 individuals at one time. That personal interaction is removed because of the volume that's having to be performed.
100%. Everything's diluted, right? You know, whether that's the brand, whether that's the management time, whether that's the time of the management with the employees or with employees with each other. So absolutely. Now, one of the things that is commonly considered when we're looking at turnover, how can we reduce that? How can we really get into it? Is better hiring. So better hiring makes absolute sense. Obviously, if you can go out there and hire better each time, you would hope that those people would stay longer. But it will certainly help. It isn't the cure, though, because if you're bringing people in who might be better into that same environment where there's certain triggers as to why people are leaving, whatever that might be, then that turnover might reduce slightly, but it's not going to see the reductions that you really, really want to. So as we progress on here and start to look at what are some of those approaches that people make in order to bring up engagement in order to tackle high turnover? So Elliot, for yourself on here, obviously we've got 4 on here. We've got employee NPS surveys, looking at those kind of online resources that are out there, being flexible, and something I'm sure Savory are quite keen on, positive employee experience. Which would you say would be number 1 that you guys are really thinking about here in terms of your approaches?
Absolutely. I think that the one that we're focusing most on is that positive employee experience. We absolutely have touch point on the other 3 that are listed, but yeah, I think that priority number 1 right now is that positive employee experience. If they can't have it with us, they will have it somewhere else. So we have to have our knife sharpened, and we have to be ready to go as soon as before they enter the door. There has to be a positive employee experience, right?
Absolutely. And if to kind of drill down on that further, if you were to think of one of Savory's brands in terms of creating that positive employee experience, what would be the sort of things that you maybe over, let's say, the last few months, last year, that you've been really thinking about and driving within that given brand around positive employee experience?
Absolutely. It sounds mundane and it sounds cliche, but it really is the low-hanging fruit. When there is so much going on, a lot falls to the wayside. For example, a simple text before day 1 starts, regular benchmarking of training for the employee, to not backtrack. But if I'm an employee at a restaurant level, I'm working my butt off to get all my training done, and I'm not being benchmarked by my general manager. It is their purpose to my training. Again, sounds simple, sounds cliche, but every employee that comes to one of our locations, there is set uniform standards, and uniform is issued either day 1 of their employment lifecycle with us or even prior to that. Again, pulling on my experience, I was very bought into the brand that I worked at a restaurant level, and it felt cool to have the hat and the t-shirt. You know what I mean? Before I got there for my first shift. It's such a little thing, but it's a part of that positive experience for an employee.
Yeah, absolutely. That initial induction, that employee experience, feeling part of the team, and the kit, as you say, absolutely matters. So historically, thinking about people leaving and turnover, what have you looked at previously to start to predict or understand, this employee is not so happy, they might be looking to leave. Now, whether that's, really from very simply on the human level and asking, or whether there's any kind of analytics behind it. But what sort of things have you historically looked at?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a good example, which is one that's not thought about a ton, but we have some restaurant brands in Arizona. I'm unaware of attendees today listening, but Arizona is notoriously excruciatingly hot. Now, their seasonality is flipped to other places, but we have a predictable employee turnover peak when it becomes their hot season. So kind of that end of June, start of July, we know that individuals are going to be turning over more frequently. Now, you typically think of bad employee engagement, bad management, bad training, but we've had to really look outside of this and think of other external factors that might be playing in when it comes to predicting when turnover might occur. Another thing that we're pushing really hard for is looking at orientation completion on our training software. It's almost a predictable metric of if orientation isn't completed, then unfortunately the turnover rate, it goes up.
That makes absolute sense. And are there other tech tools that Savory are currently utilizing to further enhance the employee engagement and to gather that feedback?
Yeah, I'll touch on 2 things. I do want to touch on ENPS because it's listed. We had a brand that completed an ENPS survey. The results came back at around a 2. Now it's rated from negative 100 to positive 100, right? So a 2 is smack bang in the middle. There was some phenomenal ways that feedback was given in this survey. And it gave the employees a voice that maybe necessarily wouldn't be available to them unless they went out of their comfort zone, approached their general manager, sent a text, sent an email, whatever. We gave them this tech tool on this survey. One thing was identified in that. We were able to tweak that policy. We performed another survey a quarter later. Our score went from a 2 to a 30, and we didn't have a single employee kind of identify or highlight the issue that was previous. Now, that's a relieving feeling where you identify an issue, the employees are given a voice on their day-to-day, the issue can be tweaked, and then you see the feedback come back and the issue is taken care of. I think that is the core of engagement with employees, giving them a voice, giving them a platform, somewhere they feel comfortable to give feedback and opportunities to kind of tweak.
And you mentioned a second one, so EMPS. Yeah.
The MPS number 1, absolutely. Number 2, sorry, I got ahead of myself there. Do excuse me. We've actually been rolling out nothing fancy. It's an Excel spreadsheet. We are tracking everyone that is joining one of our specific brands. We have an Excel spreadsheet that says their start date, their name, their phone number, when their week 1 mark will be, when their month 1 mark will be. We are then manually sending text out to these employees saying, welcome to the team. This is Elliot from Savory. Really excited to have you. How's your first day been? Later on down the line, we then send them another text manually that says, how's your first week been? How's your first month been? And it's a lot to manage with just an Excel spreadsheet, but it's our way to engage with our employees to make sure that we can find out about that very fragile time of orientation and onboarding.
That makes very good sense. And so around flexibility, one of the other points on here, is there anything in particular that Savory does? It might be across the Savory business, but it might be also, unique to certain brands, to be particularly flexible in order to enhance that employee experience and enhance engagement.
Absolutely. Our industry is notorious for lesser flexibility, right? We are as flexible as we possibly can be. The Harri scheduling tools allows for a lot of communication store to store. It also allows for a lot of shift swapping, right? I think that's as flexible as we can be in the restaurant space. But yeah, we're definitely utilizing that piece.
That's, very, very insightful. Thank you. So moving on, just to go through more points that people, I think, watching this may find interesting, and we can discuss and go through these around empowering engagement through the tech that you adopt. And obviously, Elliot, you've mentioned some of the elements in there. So another, I think, that is absolutely key is innovative communication platforms. So how do we enhance that communication between the teams and between management and staff? Clearly, the more that we communicate, the more engaged we are in the job that we're in. So absolutely key. So if you're out there and you're thinking to yourself, well, I'm in a hospitality or I'm in retail or whatever industry that I'm in, how are my employees communicating? Particularly, how are my frontline employees communicating in the business? Is that done in an ad hoc basis? Is it outside of our control? Is it by text outside of the business? Is it if you use it by WhatsApp? Is it, a different tool? Is it email, but not controlled within the business, not viewable and visible within the business? That's definitely something to think about. What tool and what tech can you be using? Whatever provider, whether that's Harri, and the tools and Comms Hub and different things that we use, or whichever tech provider you use, what is that platform? What's that communication? And how bought in are people to it? That's absolutely key. Insightful predictive analytics. And I know, Elliot, we touched a little bit on, how we start to think and how we start to predict turnover and analytics. In terms of tools and parts of the system that you use, be that, Harri and other areas. Is there anything else that you would want to add in there in terms of useful tools that might then lead to prediction?
Yeah, I'll touch on it probably a couple of times today, but our software that we use for training, it gives us such an extensive insight into everything that's being performed. It's not just this module has been complete. That's all the data that it spits out. It spits out the time of day, the extent that content was reviewed before exams and tests were taken, kind of that engagement piece for the training specifically. And that really helps to understand, is this employee committed to this part of their career, or are they just going through the motions on the training app? So yeah, that's definitely one.
Right. Yeah, perfect. And the next, for people starting to think about this, so automated feedback systems, as Elliot's alluded to, very, very pressured in terms of the life and the responsibilities that you have as a general manager, particularly in hospitality. So how can you be thinking about the technology that you use and the automated feedback systems to gather from your employees? And we'll touch on that in a little bit, but becoming a really, really big thing across the software space. So certainly something to be thinking about. Employee-centric self-serve options. So how do you empower your employees through benefit scheduling, et cetera, et cetera? And I just wanted to touch on with yourself, Elliot, in terms of benefits, and again, it might be a particular brand of something that you do that's a bit unique or something across the board. How do you explain your benefits, and are there particular ones that you feel resonate in terms of driving that engagement with your employees at the front line?
Absolutely. Yeah, we have multiple touch points with one specific brand. There's lots of benefits working there and benefits that we've rolled out to enhance employee experience. And we have, I can probably think of 4 or 5 touch points where the benefits are over explained in order for the employee to understand. We never want an employee to say after the fact, I had that available to me to improve my quality of life and it wasn't communicated. And we want to celebrate what is good about working at this place and what do you get as an employee. So yeah, just that, the over communication of.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And the last one here is adaptive learning platforms. So making sure that you're thinking about integrating your technology so it really caters to diverse learning styles and diverse neurodiversity and so on and so forth, so that you're not only being as inclusive as you can, but you're broadening yourself to the widest possible market in terms of talent and retaining that talent. So thinking about what are those building blocks for employee engagement. So whatever tech you're looking to go after, it should really encompass 3 things. If you're trying to engage your frontline workforce in particular, the first thing is that those touch points when you reach out to people need to be flexible. You need, as an administrator, to be able to set them up really easily, what I would call set and forget. So when I'm looking at our product of Harri Engage, obviously there are multiple platforms out there that some of you may use. But if I'm thinking about our product, I'm thinking about how you as an administrator are setting up those touch points, doing set and forget. That means being able to program them programmatically to go out to different employees working at different locations on different days, different times, and different relativities. So, how are you able to ask questions of your employees in their first 30 days that you don't need to ask beyond that, so that you can really start to pull those things apart. Thinking of that Savory case, for example, Elliot and the business is absolutely huge and fast paced, but there's different aspects to that business, right? So how do you tease apart those different things? How do you find out what the front of house team versus the back of house team versus the management and how they're feeling? You need to be able to target your touch points in different ways. So that flexibility as an administrator is absolutely key in whatever technology you look out for. The next is that employee experience. So I think what we all see, and once upon a time I was on Elliot's side of the fence. So rather than designing technology, I was on that side of leading talent acquisition. And I remember really thinking, I don't need another piece of technology which is labored on top for my managers, which is labored on top for my employees. I need my technology to all work seamlessly and do multiple tasks. So the key thing when you're looking for that technology is it a new piece that is laboring on for your employees? They're having to get a brand new app. They're having to log into something that they never do before, et cetera, and you're adding workload to them. Or are you meeting them where they are? Is the technology in the flow of work that they're already doing? Is it in the same place where they look at their schedule? Is it in the same place where they look at their other communications, et cetera, et cetera? How simplified can you make it for that employee experience? If you make it simplified, you make it in their normal flow of work, you will get a higher response rate and a higher level of engagement. So whatever you're looking at in terms of technology for engagement, that should really be top of mind. And then the last thing is, that output that everyone wants. What are those actionable insights? So Elliot's touched on some of those different things, historically in terms of what's been done. How can you pull all of that together? In an ideal world, you want to pull that together for different personas. So a general manager needs to see different things than above store. If you're an area manager or you're an area coach or director, you need to see different things. And then going all the way up to C-suite, you need to see different things again, and you need to be able to segment your business differently. So you need those flexible touch points to set it up really easily. You need that employee experience in their natural flow of work. And then you need actionable insights at your fingertips. So whatever technology you're looking at, I would suggest that those three things are how you run the rule over it to understand whether it's the right technology for you and for your organization. And just to kind of start to bring some of this together, engaged employees stay longer. We know it. We know that they perform better. If you think of your top performers within your organization that you work for, that you're a leader in, then the people who are engaged stay longer. They feel part of that business, they feel invested in the business, and then they perform better. The next thing then is that's a virtuous cycle. It's driving up that customer experience and profitability. So, whichever business you're in, whichever industry you're in, the longer that people are in that business and the longer that they're staying with you, they're improving themselves all the time and you're helping them to improve. And that just compounds on top of itself. So that's why turnover is so vicious when you have it and it's high and people are spinning and leaving. It's just really diminishing all of the good stuff that you're building within your business. So it's absolutely crucial in terms of tackling turnover in order to drive your business. The two aren't separated. If you increase engagement, you lower turnover, your profitability and all of the output metrics will come from that. And this is, an interesting stat that's come out in terms of the absence of a supportive manager increases someone's chance of quitting by 4x. And I think if we all think, throughout our careers, the different line managers that we've had, how supportive they are, and therefore our own personal propensity to leave, we can probably all feel that anecdotally, but the data bears it out. So, just something really, really key. So if that's a really key indicator, then how can you as an HR and as a business leader really understand that? You need a tool in order to get at that. It's no good even in a small organization, but certainly in a mid-sized, large enterprise organization to do that on anecdote. It's useful to understand those stories, but you need the data that sits behind it. So therefore, whatever tech it is, increasingly important to have that tool that you can assess in those three areas that I've set out before, so that you can start to understand who are the supportive managers, who are the employees out there who aren't having a great experience. Elliot's highlighted a number of things as we've discussed on the call today in terms of the importance of that initial induction point, whether that's getting your uniform or whether it's how you're welcomed in. How do you find out about that? Now, yes, you can have years of experience, obviously, like someone like Elliot's been in that business and it's lived and learned experience. If you can labor that on top of it to have data and analytics that's regularly telling you that. And the importance there, I will stress, is regularity. If you're doing, which, a lot of organizations do, if you're doing, let's say, a big annual survey, or you're doing 6 monthly, or even if you're doing a quarterly pulse check, if you think of that level of turnover in hospitality at 150%, the two don't go together. Doing annual, doing 6 monthly, doing quarterly is largely designed for a white collar workforce that has very low levels of attrition and turnover. If your team are spinning and turning very, very quickly, by the time you even do that quarterly, a large proportion of them will have left and you won't be able to address it because it's different people then answering the questions. Whatever you do, you need to be doing this regularly. Most likely you need to be asking an engagement question once a week in order to chart that and to predict. Certainly, no less frequently, I would say, than once a month at the absolute maximum. But if you're thinking about that level of turnover, that's the kind of regularity that you need to be thinking about engaging with your employees on a programmatic basis to understand. And so, lastly, before I hand back to Sam for Q&A, is just for us to think about in terms of one aspect from a quite large survey that's come out in terms of, do you feel like your employer has the right tools and technology in place for you to succeed at your job? And you can see the correlation here. If the answer is no, then much higher propensity to quit. So if you think about that, that's not just, we're not just talking about an engagement tool, we're talking about all the technology in hospitality. Have I got the right POS system? Have I got the right scheduling system? Have I got the right recruitment system, and so on and so forth? All of those tools are really key. But if you think the thing that wraps all of those around is understanding. You need to understand and engage with your workforce. You need to understand that they haven't got the right tools and technology. How do you know that if you're not asking, and you're not asking on a regular basis? So what I would say is just really be thinking about and taking away from today, what is the tool? What is the technology? What is the way that you're engaging with your employees on a regular basis so you can surface that up the organization to C-suite level and be having those discussions in order to eventually lead to higher profitability within the business. So Sam, back over to you.
Great. Well, thank you both for all the insights there. Great discussion about something that's definitely top of mind for a lot of people and a lot of businesses. So we're going to turn to questions from the audience now. I will just read them out and turn them back over to you guys to get your thoughts here. So the first one we have says, what key traits make a supportive manager?
I think I'm going to chuck that one to you, Elliot, as the practitioner.
Absolutely. Oh, that's a general question, but I think when it comes to employee engagement, a supportive manager is one that is, I think that it's a hard one to put a definitive number on, but it shows interest, for goodness sakes. You can't put a definitive number on someone showing interest. What interest level did they show in you? But it's intrinsic, isn't it? You can feel that there's interest there. I think that sometimes actions speak louder than words, and a supportive manager regularly checking up on personal pulse and on employment pulse, on training, on production. I think that those actions show that you are a supportive manager. James, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I agree with all of that wholeheartedly. I think the thing I would potentially add is that there's no one size fits all. If you're a supportive manager, then there's no one way of doing that, but it's the classic not treating everyone equally. Everyone at work will have different challenges at different times, whether that's in work or whether that's out of work. So, understanding and being able to appreciate that on a personal level and therefore act on it. For me, that's the basis of being a supportive manager.
The next one we've got here says, Elliot, can you double click on the correlation between new employees not completing onboarding tech and turnover? You mentioned it at a high level, but I'd love to hear more.
Absolutely. I think that all of us are trying to make sense of turnover rates in our industry specifically, right? James, at the start of this, gave a touch point on QSR versus other spaces and how we're suffering a higher turnover rate across the board for QSR specific restaurants. I think that one of our initiatives at Savory is trying to make sense of why the turnover is where it is. So just like any scientific process, we're theorizing on potential links between the two. And one that we're recently trying to pull data on is the correlation between that onboarding experience and the turnover percentage. We're rather infant in the exploration of it, but we're trying to find the trend and hopeful that the data will prove a point there.
Let's see. We also have someone who was curious to hear a little bit about Harri Engage. Yeah, could you guys tell us a little bit about that platform?
Absolutely. I would love to take this one, James, if you don't mind, mate. Harri has a couple of tools that are usable. In the past, we would use on the clock-in iPads in each of our locations, we would push out pop-ups that would come up before you clock in, and it would also appear on the point of sale. Now, if we rolled out a new initiative at the restaurant, for example, a referral bonus, or there was a staff meeting coming up, any way that we were engaging with our team, it would push out to everybody that worked at that location. No specificity, but it was at least some employee engagement for messaging, so kind of that messaging piece. James, you touched on it earlier, but Harri Engage, since we've rolled it out in the last couple of weeks, for goodness sakes, we've been able to be very granular in the employee engagement. I do not want to ask front of house employees, how is the new oven treating you in the back of the house? It shows a lack of connection and sometimes a bit insulting, right? Harri Engage has allowed us to push out messaging specific as individuals that there's maybe 3 or 4 of them. They're the only people that are getting this message. And then we can push it out to absolutely everybody at the store level as well. So hopefully that gives you some insight into Harri Engage for that question.
Let's see, we've got another one here that says, as we look toward the future of the hospitality industry, what emerging technologies or strategies do you believe will play a pivotal role in revolutionizing engagement and recruitment in the coming years?
I'll take that then. Okay, so where do I see this going? I think there's a divergence of what sorry, not a divergence, the opposite actually, a coming together of implicit and explicit feedback. So a lot of what we've been talking about today, and Elliot and I have been touching on, is very much about explicit feedback. What I mean by that is asking employees exactly how they're feeling about something, getting their feedback, engaging with them directly, and understanding that feedback, whether that's on a scored basis, whether that's on a sentiment open text basis, or whatever that is. There's another side to look at in terms of implicit feedback. So what are people doing, not what they're saying? So let's say, for example, you might be able with hospitality, because the nature of a scheduled business, to see, are people starting to turn up late? You know, are they taking more sick days? Are they swapping out of shifts on a kind of regular basis to not to improve things for themselves, but just because they're starting to feel negatively towards the job? So one of the things that we've been working on is a model with our AI team at Harri to understand around 20 different data points that we are able to collect and start to crunch those together and say, what is the implicit level of sentiment? So how are people feeling, not in what they're saying, but in what they're doing? So if you start to take those two together, you start to understand the explicit, you know, what am I saying? How happy am I? And then what are my actions saying? And you start to put them together and correlate. And that's what we're starting to do now. And I think in the future, and we're talking, you know, next few months for Harri, but certainly over the next 12 is going to be extremely exciting, is how do you put those together from a predictive point of view? So if you can combine those together and someone's telling you they're unhappy and their actions say that they're happy, what does that mean? And conversely, if I'm saying I'm happy, but I'm starting to show up late, what does that mean? And can we start to predict whether people will leave? Which means that, Elliot and other practitioners out there can actually start to see that and say, are these employees at these locations about to leave? We can then refine that model over time and hopefully start to understand and intervene on that turnover. So for me, that's the kind of future of where I think this is going.
Kind of building on that one, we've got another one in here that says, how do you take the feedback and make it actionable?
I'm happy to talk on that one as the practitioner, right, James? I'll take it, mate. When it comes to taking the feedback and making it actionable, I think it depends at what level the feedback has been given. Is it a brand-wide feedback piece? Is it location-specific? Is it maybe role-by-role specific? And I think that whenever feedback is given, the hardest thing to happen is to not feel like it's been heard and received. If I put myself out there, make myself feel very uncomfortable and give feedback, and it feels like I'm talking to a wall, it doesn't feel great, right? So I think something that we're doing at Savory quite well is feedback is given, and as soon as it is, we are communicating through various channels. We hear your feedback, we understand your concern, and then we get the opportunity to game plan from there and tweak and pivot and do better. One of our brands specifically is doing a phenomenal job with weekly one-on-ones between a general manager and employees. It's actually one of their bonus metrics. They have to perform their one-on-ones. And that is such a great opportunity to implement potential changes that directly talk to the feedback that's been given.
All right, here. We've got another one for Elliot. They say, you mentioned using Harri Engage to power your strategy. Can you share a bit more about how you implemented engagement tech in your business and how the team has felt about its results?
Yeah, I think this answer is quite similar to my previous answer. On our data that we're collecting on orientation that's been complete, Harri Engage is still rather new for us as a platform. We are still quite heavily collecting data and seeing where is most effective on employee engagement using Harri Engage. I personally am rather excited to see where it can take us and how the team will feel about hearing their feedback, engaging with them, and then how it can be implemented.
All right. Another person asks, some organizations use NPS to gauge employee sentiment. Are there other tech tools or platforms that have been explored or considered to further enhance engagement?
I suppose that's kind of more for Elliot, but I think we probably touched on that when we were talking about NPS before and gone through. Unless, Elliot, anything more to touch on in terms of any NPS tools that you've used historically?
Yeah, other tools that we've used, other tech tools that we've used, we found massive value from exit interviews. Now, exit interviews can be done when employees are no longer employees, but it's still a part of that employee engagement experience, right, from start to finish. We've recently used some survey administering technology. As soon as an employee is terminated in Harri, then we're able to push out through an external tool a very simple online exit interview. And again, it sheds some fantastic light on ways that we can potentially do better.
All right. Looks like we've got one more in here that I will toss out to you guys. Given the significant focus on employee engagement to reduce turnover, can you provide insights on the time frame typically observed between implementing an engagement strategy and witnessing a tangible reduction in turnover rates?
I'll start, as I'm conscious that Elliot's had a few questions fired at him. So in terms of time frame, it's the old answer of it depends. It depends what you're doing. So to Elliot's point, being on Harri Engage at Savory now, there's an initial piece of understanding and learning. I think there's a piece of asking questions, understanding how to ask good questions, which I think that's something to touch on in terms of any tool where you're seeking feedback for your employees, is not just assuming that the question you're asking is the right one. Initially testing some different ways of asking the question that you're trying to, whether that elicits you the right answer. So that's kind of one bit, first of all. Once you get down the road and you're getting good feedback coming in, then you need to action that. Now, some of the stuff could be really easy and could be really quick. And it also depends on the business's propensity and the desire to fix some of those things. So let's say it comes back and pay, it's the one that people obviously don't like to speak about for obvious reasons. But let's say it comes back and pay is a big driver. Now, yeah, in theory, you could fix that very quickly, but it could also be very painful to fix. So it might require further unpacking and understanding, as well as pay, are there other things you can do, around benefits, et cetera, et cetera. It might be something that's takes a little bit of time, but one we see quite common is around schedule. One of the two big drivers other than pay that we find in our data of why people leave. So one of them is around schedule, and that's not necessarily not getting the schedule that you want, but it might just be something as simple as not getting the schedule early enough. It's a classic sort of tale in hospitality of, getting your schedule the sort of night before the week begins. Now, for any of us on this call, if your line manager told you that you had to be, working certain hours, et cetera, and you find that out on Sunday night before Monday, then you're not going to stay for that long. So it might be something that's relatively easy to fix like that, where you can shift. You can make a shift. Will take a bit of time, but getting your schedules out earlier, for example. So for my money, it kind of really depends on that time frame. I don't know, Elliot, whether there's specific things that you've found before in getting feedback at Savory, where you've then gone on and implemented something, and maybe what that is and what sort of time frame that might take.
Absolutely. To give maybe a different perspective, again, I'm harping on my experience working at the restaurant level, but it feels invaluable in this conversation. We had an issue and concern at the location I was working at regarding some equipment that we were using. We communicated that through the channels that were available at the time. This was 7-8 years ago, so just a little bit, and instantly changes were implemented. Now, maybe obviously the question that spoke about tangible results, but the intangibles of employee morale going up among my fellow co-workers, that was the biggest value that I saw. We had a concern, communicated it. We were engaged with our manager, and instantly a small change was made, and the morale seemed to just go up, right? Again, not something that you can necessarily track of employee feelings, how you're feeling right now, but it was something that was palpable in the restaurant. The walls speak, and it was definitely a more positive environment, and things seemed to go smoother because of that little tweak that was done by our manager.
All right. Well, looks like we've touched on the questions the audience had for you. So that will conclude our program today. Many thanks to Harri for making this possible, to our audience for attending, and of course to James and Elliot for sharing their insights. As a reminder, a recording of this program will be linked on qsrmagazine.com, and you can also use today's login link to view it at any time. Thanks again, and have a great day, everyone.